plentiful entity on the planet. They infect just about everything. They infect plants, they infect bacteria. You know, they're viruses that infect bacteria. That little squiggly one that you see down there called the bacteriophage. It infects bacteria and destroy them many of the times. So they infect us. The good news is that the vast majority of these microbes, 99 point something % of them, do not cause disease in humans. You know, many times they coexist with us without causing significant disease. Now, it's also important to realize that viruses, of necessity, need to infect us and get inside of our cells. Most other microbes that infect us, most bacteria that infect us, don't enter our cells. They don't need to. They can float around in our blood and get all the nutrients they want. But viruses do not have the molecular or protein making machinery that they need. And so they infect our cells because they have to use our cells to make more of themselves. And that's really important. That's what the video is saying.
Viruses have their own genetic code, but they don't have the machinery to copy their DNA. So viruses need your cell's machinery to reproduce themselves. A virus starts this process by using the keys on its surface to gain entry. Like a Trojan horse, it enters the cell. The virus releases its own DNA into the unsuspecting cell and hijacks the protein-making machinery. Now, this vital cell function becomes an assembly line for new virus particles. No longer in service to your body, the cell now serves the virus. Manufacturing thousands of new virus particles, which are released to enslave more cells, thousands and thousands more.
And so he mentioned DNA there, but of course, this is also true of RNA viruses. Viruses can either be DNA or RNA. You know, they can't be both. That's an easy way to identify them. So that brings us to this outbreak that we have with this coronavirus family member that we've been dealing with. And essentially, this is not a new virus by any means in terms of understanding its family. This is a new virus in terms of the fact that we haven't seen this family member before. But in terms of understanding these viruses, they have been around since the 1960s. So these ones over here on your left, your HCOV2 229E, these were discovered in 1965 to 1968, the University of Chicago initially, and they just cause the common cold. They're respiratory viruses. But 3 times now, we've seen these viruses come into the human population have been deadly. The first one was the SARS outbreak in 2004, where this virus came from bats, which is typically where they're coming from, some rodent or bats, into a civet cat. And then from the civet cat got transmitted to humans. And then we started having human-to-human transmission. And this rapidly spread across the world, leading to the death of about 700 and something people and infecting about 8,000 people. So you're talking about a 10% mortality rate. But it relatively quickly went away. But at that moment, I want you to realize that scientists actually started trying to make a vaccine against this family of viruses because their ability to jump, what we have a zoonotic infection, jump from the animal hosts into humans was concerning. Over time, they couldn't make a vaccine because, of course, if the pandemic has stopped, you can't test a vaccine. And so as a result of that, they weren't able to test a vaccine in development for this. And then, of course, money kind of dried up. People stopped thinking about it in the same way. But of course, scientists kept on warning. When I teach my class, I would say, this is one of the things we're looking out for. And then in 2012, we had a second SARS family member come into the human population and prove deadly. And this is still ongoing. This is called the Middle East Respiratory Syndrome coronavirus, or MERS. And MERS jumped from, again, a bat into a camel, and from camels to humans. The good news, if there's one with MERS, is that number one, you only find it where you find camels because it can't be transmitted yet human to human. So it's being transmitted from camels to humans. And then, of course, we all know that in 2019, end of 2019, in Wuhan, China, we heard about the outbreak of this new disease. Since then, it has been traced back to a bat and maybe some intermediate host. Nobody really knows, but it got into the human population. And again, they know that it's a member of the coronavirus family. This family of viruses gets its name, corona means crown, because of these spike proteins that you see on its surface. And these are proteins that are necessary for the virus to actually infect. It needs these spike proteins because those are the keys that the virus used to unlock our cells to get in. And we talk a little bit more about that. But what I want to show you right up front is just how efficient these viruses are. Within 10 minutes of infecting you for the original SARS-CoV-2 virus that came out of Wuhan, within 10 minutes of getting into your system, it already makes it inside of the cell, right? That's how long it takes. From the time that it enters your airway until it's inside of the cell is 10 minutes. Within 10 hours, it has doubled its progeny. It has made new viral particles that it's releasing. And this one viral particle going in turns into 1,000 or more that are being released. And what you're seeing here, the red there are your cell, is an electron microscope image of a cell that has been false colored. And all the little yellow dots there are coronavirus particles. So in a short time, it is ready to infect a new set of cells. And it does this through, again, these spike proteins that it has on its surface, utilizing what is called an ACE2 receptor on your cell. Many people say, oh, I got infected because my immune system is not functioning or something else like that. No, you got infected because you have this protein, because you're a human being. And all human beings have ACE2 receptors on their cells, multiple cells of the body, including those in the throat, nostrils, and respiratory tract. And so the virus binds to that and is using its spike protein, and it's able to get inside the cell. And once it does, it uses the cellular machinery, which is what you're seeing there called the ribosome, to make its proteins. The virus has multiple proteins, about 30 proteins, and it uses our cells to make those 30 proteins. Why? Because all that the virus cares about is making more of itself. It doesn't really want to kill us, but it will kill us if that means that it can make more of itself. And over time, it just captures and hijacks that cellular machinery to make more and more and more of itself, so that it can send those out into the circulation to infect more cells. So again, this virus outbreak started in Wuhan. At least that's where it was first detected. We're not sure exactly if that's where it exactly started. It takes a long time, many times, to figure this out. But people have spread this theory that maybe the virus escaped from the labs in Wuhan. And while that is still a remote possibility, it is highly unlikely, since we've always had these viruses jump from bats straight into human population. So it's not a hard leap to make that these viruses actually came from their natural host, which is the bat, and based on the sequencing data, that's what it shows. So while I still have the possibility open that there is that possibility, that very slim possibility, that a virus could have infected somebody who was working with it, and then come from there out of the lab into the population, that would be such an easy thing to trace. And while China has not been very open with sharing information, there is no reason for me to believe that that's how this virus came about. I just firmly believe that this virus came about in a natural way, that we've seen it. And the whole theory about gain of function mutation, and that's how this virus was created, that is also total false. So at this point, as of today, over 202 million people have been infected. 4.3 million just about have died from this virus. And Trinidad has been listed, Trinidad and Tobago specifically have been listed by the CDC as being at very high risk over the past few months because of the rate of infections that you've had. So compared to many places, you might not be doing all that badly. As of yesterday, you had just about 40,233 cases with 1,137 deaths. That's significant for an island with just about 1.3 million people. An island, Twin Islands with 1.3 million people. But again, it's bad and it's not so bad. The other good news is that you're vaccinating, and your vaccination rates there on the island are looking pretty decent. 417,070 people vaccinated, and there's an opening up of many vaccine sites, and I'll show you that at the end, where people can go and make an appointment and get a vaccine. So in my opinion, you're not doing poorly, but with the new variant that we're having, that is problematic. I'm showing this graph because when they looked at the death toll from COVID, there are two ways to look at it. You can look at what is reported from day to day, which is what we're seeing most of the times. But oftentimes you also have to look at the excess death. When you look at the deaths in 2018 and 2017 and 2019, before this pandemic, how does that compare to 2020? And when they did that, what they found was that there is between 7 to 13 million excess deaths. And the vast majority of these excess deaths are being attributed to COVID. In other words, the numbers that we have as this 3.4 million people dead from COVID, it could be 2 to 3 times that amount that have died worldwide from the virus. So that's another thing to think about. Now, this virus has been like no other that I've seen in terms of the types of sequelae, the types of signs and symptoms that it shows. And it took a little while, but scientists have now figured out, and physicians have now figured out why. And the reason is that it turns out that a lot of organs in our bodies have this ACE2 receptor. Remember, I told you that that is the key. That is the lock that the virus uses, a spike protein, to unlock to get into our bodies. And as you can see, everywhere from the nasal passage and the lung, which we knew already, to now being in the intestines and the heart and the eyes and the liver and the kidneys and the pancreas, which is important, the brain, the prostate and testes of males, the placenta. All of these organs and systems are covered in these ACE2 receptors. And so the virus doesn't just infect you and stay in your lungs, it actually makes it into the blood circulation and go and infect all of these organs in any given individual. And that is why you have this multi-system organ involvement. And very quickly, this is by all means a respiratory virus because it infects your respiratory tract, and that's where you see the greatest amount of inflammation. Here's a cartoon of a normal bronchiole where you have air, when you inhale, it rushes to the trachea, go down into the bronchioles. These little sacs here are called the alveolar sac, and this is actually where the exchange of oxygen takes place. You exhale carbon dioxide, you inhale that oxygen, and blood vessels line these so that you actually have oxygen being transferred into your blood so you can take it around the body, it's pumped around the body and oxygenate. Now, over this side on the right is a lung that is inflamed, right? And this is not just COVID, this is any pneumonia leads to this type of inflammation. And one of the hallmarks of pneumonia is that your lungs actually fill up with mucus. The mucus is actually a reaction to the microbe, part of your immune system. One of the cells, one of the cell types lining here produces mucus. So it's almost like quicksand trapping the viral particles and preventing them from infecting. But over time, that prevents you from actively exchanging oxygen because they're filled up. And as this oxygen comes in and carbon dioxide is supposed to go out, your lung is less able to do that effectively. And so when these ear sacs fill up, it makes this opaque, whitish kind of image on a scan. And this is a CT scan, normal lung on your left, COVID lung on your right. And COVID literally obliterates the lung in terms of having these consolidations. Now, in addition to the sequelae that I just told you about for the lung, we now know that because of this multi-organ involvement, people feel fatigue and they have headache and they have shortness of breath. And these can go on for weeks to months, even after you've cleared the virus. So it seems as if something else is going on there. And it's a combination of maybe viruses lingering, as well as having these systems being disrupted and having long-term inflammation. And this is called long COVID. And people continue to have this. People were once healthy, from adults to kids, continue to have these feelings of not being able to think properly, this fogginess of brain, this shortness of breath and fatigue, this fever, and some people have muscle pain and joint pains and chest pains and tachycardia, you name it, loss of smell and taste. That goes on and on and on. And some people now have had this for nearly a year after having COVID. So nobody knows what the long-term effects of COVID can be. But one of the hallmarks of COVID infection is that it causes clots to form all over the circulatory system. Many patients have to be put on blood thinners just to keep their blood circulating. And when clots form, one of the outcomes of that is that it leads to blood clots getting stuck in the small blood vessels, and that's in the fingers and toes. You have smaller capillaries, and what that does is that blocks off the flow of oxygen to those extremities, causing what we call gangrene, can become infected by bacteria and stuff. And eventually, patients like these have to have these digits amputated in order to prevent the infection from getting into the person. Another thing that they've been seeing repeatedly is that you're having an increase in heart disease. It turns out that COVID actually infects the heart muscles. And so it is able to somehow destroy the heart muscles, or maybe something else is going on there. But what you're seeing is an increase of people showing up with heart disease. But probably one that has really gotten my attention the most in terms of COVID sequelae is this post-COVID diabetes. There are patients who have gotten infected with COVID, never had diabetes before, and especially if they were hospitalized. What the hospitals are seeing now is that sometimes a month or 2 months after these patients are discharged, these patients end up coming back to the hospital. Why? Because they're having symptoms of diabetes, and when they get tested, they actually do have diabetes. How does this happen? Remember, I told you that COVID actually infects the pancreas. The pancreas is where insulin is made. It turns out that there's a specific cell type called the beta cells in the pancreas that make the insulin. And you're born with all the beta cells you'll ever make. And so when the virus gets in, apparently the virus kills off these cells. And after it has killed off a certain number of them, it reaches a threshold where you can't produce enough insulin to take up the glucose into your cells. And that glucose just floats around in your blood. That's diabetes. And the estimate is that 14% of all hospitalized COVID patients come down with this post-COVID diabetes. For some people, they probably had already had risk factors. For other people, this is all new. So again, this is a significant issue for patients. So as I said before, these viruses just want to make more of themselves, but in the process of doing that, they do make mistakes. So listen to
Every time a virus infects a person, it uses their cells to make copies of itself, replicating this complex code again and again and again. But eventually, it makes a mistake. Sometimes it deletes or adds a letter, sometimes it flips them around. That mistake is called a mutation, and it slightly changes the instructions for making the virus. That slightly altered virus is a variant. Since viruses are constantly going through this copying process, it's normal for them to change over time.
So that's how these variants pop up. And so we have many, many variants, but we have what are called variants of concern. And the variants of concern are the alpha, beta, gamma, delta variant. The kappa variant people have been talking about, but there's actually a delta plus, which is a tiny little variation from this delta, but it is this delta variant that popped up in India in May of this year that is causing so much transmission here in the US and possibly where you are. I don't know how much sequencing has been done on the island to see what variant you have, but it's not unlikely that you might have the Delta variant. So here's why these variants are problematic. If this is an illustration of the virus, of the initial strain of the virus, then these little things here are the spike protein. It is the spike protein that the virus uses to attach to your cells. I call them the key that it uses to unlock your cells to get in. And so it uses them and just snap them in. You can think of Legos and building blocks, and that makes it attached to the human cells. When the virus, though, gets in, and it does that, your body, our bodies, sees these spike proteins along with all the other proteins of the virus, and it makes an antibody. This is a defense protein that our bodies make to bind to the spike protein and prevent the spike protein now from binding to its receptor. So as a result of that, the spike protein can't attach to the receptor. However, when you have a variant, here's your regular virus again, and then look at the variant. You see the block shape changes, right? That's indicating the variant. So now it fits better, right? Better fit in this building block model. And at the same time, the antibodies that were made against the initial spike protein don't block this. So people say, well, you know, I can, if my natural immunity will protect me. Because if I get infected, my body will produce antibodies and that will protect me from the virus. Except that if you have a variant, these don't fit in the way that the original one fit. And so that is what is happening with this Delta variant, which has been shown to be that much more transmissible, 50 to 70% more transmissible than the Alpha variant. And the Alpha variant was about 50 to 70% more transmissible than the original variant. And you have varying levels of vaccine efficacy. So for example, you have you guys have AstraZeneca there. One dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine is just about 33% effective against the Delta variant. You need a couple of doses to get up to about 60% efficacious. And 60% is still very good. You're not going to get sick to the point of death, or you might not even get hospitalized if you actually have that. And that's a good thing with these vaccines. They're very effective at protecting us from hospitalization and death. But of course, no vaccine protects you from getting infected. So that brings me to this point that the WHO, World Health Organization, says that there are two public health interventions that have had the greatest impact on the world's health. And that's clean water, you know, leading to sanitation, and vaccines. And sometimes we forget, you know, how long vaccines have been around. You know, in 1796, Jenner actually created the first vaccine, which was a smallpox vaccine, very messy. He took pus from somebody who had from cowpox and gave it to this little boy who had to protect him against smallpox, cut his hand and literally just put the pus in there. Of course, the pus had bacteria and other things in there. Jenner didn't know that at the time because he didn't even realize how this worked. Since then, vaccines have come a long way, and you've seen the trajectory of vaccines being created. Today, vaccines are clean, effective, safe. And the good thing you have to realize is that vaccines have had a significant impact on transmissible infectious diseases for all of these diseases, from mumps to hepatitis to rubella, chickenpox, measles. Everywhere where you see these larger circles here, that's 700,000 people. The medium-sized ones like this one, about 100,000. Then you get the tiny ones, about 10,000 to 1,000. We have the orange circle. That is where vaccine came in. And what you're seeing consistently is that everywhere that you see the orange circle, the circles get smaller after that, right? That means you have lower numbers of cases. And sometimes we forget the devastation in the pre-vaccine world for vaccine preventable disease. This is tetanus, which causes the muscles in the back to constrict, so that they keep doing that and spazzing until they literally break the back of a baby that has tetanus. You see the effects of polio, how it disfigures and deforms. And you see stuff like, you know, rubella, Haemophilus influenza type B, causing this disseminated intravascular coagulation, leading to amputation of the limbs of these kids, and smallpox. And you see, you know, varicella here, and congenital rubella, causing these lesions and leading to disfiguring and death of people. And probably one of the ones that I like to show people is whooping cough. And whooping cough was so serious. You know, the problem with the whooping cough is that you couldn't take a breath. It was hard to take a breath. So I want you to listen just for a little bit. A baby who has been infected with Bordetella Pertussis, the bacteria that causes whooping cough, and the difficulty this baby has just taking a breath. And you see why diseases like these just needed something to stop them, and vaccines were the answer.
There we go. Okay.
Trying to take a breath. Can't get one.
Okay, take a breath.
If you notice, her lips are turning blue.
Come on. Almost
There you go. And that's why it's called whooping cough. That's the whoop that you have. You hear all the machines going crazy there because she just couldn't take a breath. And these are the types of diseases that vaccines have prevented. So when I hear anti-vaccine sentiments today, sometimes I smile because I'm like, we're privileged to be in a society where we don't see this anymore. And people who criticize vaccines just haven't looked at the history and seen how it works. Now, I've shown you that vaccines work, but the question is, why do we need them? If we have good immune systems, why do we even need vaccines? The reason for that is that our immune system is not just one system, the way people like to say, oh, your immune system, let me just boost your immune system. Your immune system is actually pretty complex. And it has two arms, an innate immune response and an adaptive immune response. The innate immune response is your first responder. I like to explain to people, this is like when you call 911. This is when something happens, you call your first responder for us here. You expect the ambulance to show up, maybe the local police and fire department, depending on what the call is, right? And essentially, they provide whatever is needed. Now, there are times when 911 comes and your local dispatchers come, and the problem is so big that they have to call the SWAT team, or they have to call, the state police or something like that, because it needs more resources in order to clear it up. And here is an important take on the immune system. We only get disease when the immune system becomes overwhelmed. That's when we get disease. Only when the immune system becomes overwhelmed. The immune system is amazingly effective at responding to all types of pathogens, but sometimes the immune system gets a dose of the pathogen that is so big that you can't immediately take care of it with your innate immune system. And sometimes the pathogen is so virulent that it's able to overcome that initial response. And so the adaptive immune response kicks in. And the adaptive immune response, this black line is time. And when the adaptive immune system is kicking in here, is 2 weeks. That is why they tell you when you get the vaccine, or any vaccine, you don't get the full effect of it until after 2 weeks after you've taken the last dose. Right? That's why the 2 weeks, because it takes that much time for your adaptive immune system to kick in. It is your adaptive immune system that has the memory. It is your adaptive immune system that has the antibodies that we keep talking about. That is why we get vaccinated. So essentially then, what I'm saying is that you actually have what is called a primary and a secondary immune response, where the adaptive response is concerned. So the innate immune system is there. When a bug comes in, it tries to take care of it. Many times it needs more resources to clear it. If you've never seen the microbe before, you're always going to have a primary immune response. And the peak of this right here is 2 weeks. Why does it take that long? Because your cells in your body are clonally expanding. Your B cells and your T cells, what we call your lymphocytes, they're what are responding in your innate immune system. And they're not going to divide any faster than about once every day. And so as a result of that, that's why it takes that much time to build up this arsenal of very specific responders to what you're getting. And so that's what takes the time. However, once that happens, in addition to making what we call antibodies, these proteins that I told you about, it also makes memory cells. And these memory cells literally put this microbe in their database so that when they see it again, they will know it right away. And so when you see that microbe again, that's where the second arrow is. Instead of a week, instead of 2 weeks, it takes 2 days or a day and a half for you to have the same response. So what vaccines do is that they mimic this first response. They trick the body into thinking that it's getting attacked that first time, so that they take that primary immune response and that 2 week delay out of the equation, so that now when you see the bug for real, you respond to it in a very short time. And so it doesn't matter how strong your immune system is. It doesn't matter if you're a vegetarian. It doesn't matter at all how many times you work out per day or per week. You will never be able to shorten this primary immune response, and you wouldn't want to. Because if you did, if your adaptive immune system kicked in every single time you saw a microbe, you would not be able to leave your house. You would be weak and fatigued all the time, right? It's not a sustainable event. So you respond, it ramps up, it drops down. And not only is it faster, but it produces that much more antibodies. Now, there are lots of microbes that the innate immune system can take care of, but microbes that can kill you in a short time, and I'm gonna skip over this, like COVID, it will kill you or make you severely ill before that 2-week period. Look at the days here. This is when your primary response for your adaptive immunity would kick in. But look at that. You already have mild, moderate to severe illness from COVID by the time you reach day 10. So by the time day 14 come around, you're already critically ill and in the ICU for people, especially with underlying conditions. I hope you're getting this. This is why we make vaccines for bugs like this, for influenza, for the smallpox, for these different diseases, because they have the potential to overcome you before you're able to mount that response on your own. And so there are over 100 or just about 99 vaccines right now in clinical trials. Still, even with the ones that have been approved, 8 have been approved, 11 of them authorized around the world, 5 of them abandoned because they just didn't work out. But there's still lots of vaccines in the pipeline. And these vaccines are built on different platforms. We have the mRNA vaccines. You have the Astrazeneca vaccine and the Sinopharm vaccine. And the Astrazeneca vaccine is what we call a DNA vaccine. It's a nucleic acid vaccine. And I'm going to explain that a little bit. And then the Sinopharm is an inactivated vaccine. And here you're seeing the countries that they've been approved in. The EU, other countries in the UK and Canada. The AstraZeneca vaccine has been approved. The Sinopharm vaccine made in China has been approved there. The UAE and Bahrain and these other countries that are highly vaccinated. The UAE and Bahrain are at the very top. They've vaccinated over 70 to nearly 80% of their population at this point with these vaccines. So the AstraZeneca vaccine, as I said, is a nucleic acid vaccine. And what they've done is that essentially, once the scientists figure out what the virus was that was causing this pandemic, they actually went ahead and got the sequence, the alphabetic blueprint that make the spike protein. And the spike protein is targeted because it's indispensable to the entry of the virus. Without the spike protein, this virus would never be able to get inside of your cells. And so essentially what has happened is that they took the genetic code of this virus and they put it into a new virus that is a Trojan horse, because you have to get some way of getting this genetic blueprint into the body. So they put it into what is called an adenovirus. And for the AstraZeneca vaccine, this is a chimpanzee adenovirus that doesn't cause disease in humans and doesn't replicate. And so essentially, they just spliced it in. So here's your genetic code for the spike protein. They get it into this adenovirus, cold virus, and they inject that inside of you. And so this adenovirus will now infect your cells, get into the nucleus of your cell, deliver this DNA, and all of the genes on this nucleic acid strand will be translated into messenger RNA to make protein. So that gets in the cytoplasm. Proteins are made with the cell's machinery, and included among those proteins is the spike protein. Millions and trillions of copies of it. And when your body sees that, it actually triggers an immune response because it's foreign to the body. So that's what this protein, spike protein antigen is. And so when you get the vaccine, essentially what you're making are these antibodies, these spike proteins. And when they see the virus for real, because what you just did, you triggered the primary immune response. So if you ever encounter the virus for real, these antibodies are floating around your system and they will bind to the bug and destroy it, right? So that's how that works. Now, the Sinopharm vaccine, again, it's utilizing the entire viral protein. So what they do is that they inactivate the virus. In other words, kill the virus. And they use this beta propiolactone, this BPL, And what it does is that it gets inside of the virus, gets inside of the nucleic acid material, the genetic material of the virus, and inactivates it. This is the same chemical that they use to inactivate influenza for the influenza vaccine. So it's commonly used, but essentially what you have now are dead viruses. And they inject these dead viruses inside of you. Your body sees them, pick them up, process them, seize all the proteins, and make antibodies against pretty much all of them, including the spike protein and other proteins that are there, the 30 or so proteins that the virus has. And that now serves to protect you so that your body, your B cells start producing these antibodies. They float around. And in addition, you have activated B cells and T cells that are memory cells, and these serve to actually protect you overall. I'm going to skip over the mRNA vaccines, except to say to you, if somebody wants to know more about them, since your country doesn't have them, I'll skip over it for now, but except to say that people like to say that these mRNA technology is new, but it's not. You know, mRNA technology has been around for decades. It's just that we never had a vaccine approved that was an mRNA vaccine before. But as you can see, this is a 2017 paper looking at the safety and efficacy of an mRNA vaccine for rabies. Here's another one for flu. Here's another one for Zika, all in human trials. So all of these were happening in 2017, 2018, 2019, just before the pandemic. So it was a perfect storm. And here you have a paper in 2017 saying mRNA vaccines and you are in vaccinology. By the way, the guy here whose name is at the end, Drew Weissman, is actually the creator of this mRNA vaccine technology, along with his graduate student at the time and colleague, Critical. So people are saying that Dr. Malone is the one who created mRNA technology. That's absolutely not true. Of course, these vaccines all have their side effects. You can feel fever and fatigue and all of those things that one gets from a vaccine. You should be aware of it. But to date, 4.4 billion people worldwide have been vaccinated. And what we're seeing, you know, this really cool study was done by the Cleveland Clinic as I wrap up here. And what they show is that 99.7% of all recent COVID infections at the Cleveland Clinic was from unvaccinated people, right? So essentially what we're seeing in the US, where we have a decent number of people vaccinated, is that only 0.3% or less of people who are vaccinated are actually having these infections. You can see the numbers again in states like Wyoming and Mississippi and Missouri. Here in the United States and Arkansas, they have very low vaccine rates. And so they actually have very high COVID rates. And these are COVID deaths. While in my state of Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Vermont, that have over 70% of our people vaccinated at this stage, we have very low COVID rates and very low death rates as well. Here again, you're seeing it. In counties where you have people who are least vaccinated, you're actually having higher death rates compared to those that are most vaccinated. You're having lower death rates, right? Even though you're having cases increasing in all municipalities. In the month of June, in Maryland, this is a state that has probably 3 times the amount of people that you have there. Trinidad, essentially 100% of the deaths were from unvaccinated people, right? So again, the data is showing over and over and over again, 99.2% of US COVID deaths in June were from unvaccinated individuals. And so, you know, especially for my Christian friends, who we collectively prayed at the beginning of the pandemic that God would do something, that he will save us from this pandemic. And would you know it, he answered our prayers, in my opinion. And we got some vaccines that are very, very effective. So in Trinidad and Tobago there, you have several sites where if you are open to getting vaccines, you can get the Sinopharm vaccines, first and second dose vaccines. They're available from today, Monday, August 9th, at the following locations here: your National Academy for the Performing Arts. You're having Paddock and Queen's Park, Savannah. You're having vaccine sites at Civic Center there, the National Racket Center, NCIC, the Valley, Nagar site. You're actually having the Attabolden Stadium having vaccination there as well, and on, one near you. and you can get the AstraZeneca first and second doses. You can sign up for those. There's a site there, a website that you can go to protect yourself, and you can sign up for there. The Frankie Bodram Waterfield. It's a drive-through you can go, and of course the heliport there also has a drive-through site. The UTT campus also has a site, and the National Racket Center also has a site that you can go to get vaccinated. So your island has done a really great job of setting up vaccine sites overall. And the goal at some point is to reach herd immunity, reach a place where you have enough people vaccinated so that you protect the vulnerable who can't get vaccinated. And here you're seeing, with 75% vaccinated, the model is showing that you can protect most people. But if you actually have a variant that is more infectious, essentially, even some of those people who have been vaccinated can get infected and potentially could transmit the virus to others. So that's something that you really need to think about. So I like to describe it this way. Getting to herd immunity is like having fire breaks in your forest. You see, these forests are planted and it's not continuous trees. You actually have a situation there where you have a clearing, that if you have a fire, a forest fire, it will burn just a section and you can replant that, but the probability of it jumping over to a next section is very low. That is essentially what herd immunity is. And so finally, none of these things is foolproof. So continue wearing a mask. A mask alone won't protect you fully. Physical distancing alone won't protect you. Washing your hands alone won't protect you. This is what they call the Swiss cheese model, that you're always going to find holes there through which the virus can come. But if you put all of these together, practicing these safety steps and taking a vaccine as part of it, then you can be sure that you'll have a solid protection from this virus. And I'll stop there, and I'm happy to take your questions at this point.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Webley, so much. Ryan, can you take over and give some instructions as to how we'll do? Right.
We're going to do this. Okay. Hi, everyone. You hear me?
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'll arrange you seeing me just now. All right. So what we want to do is, I know we have some persons would have questions for Dr. Webley, and we want to make sure we could facilitate those. So the easy way is probably use the icons and you raise your hand. That's under reactions. That's the easy way, if you could figure that out. Other than that, you just go one at a time if you can't figure out how to raise your hand, all right? We're just going to make it friendly and take it from there. I have one question already because someone messaged me, so I could probably start with that. The question is, if the COVID-19 variant changes so regularly, how effective would the vaccine be, and I have in brackets, which was developed for one strain, for the new strain? Does it mean that persons would have to be vaccinated over and over again?
Very good question. We've gotten lucky so far that we haven't had a variant yet that has completely escaped the vaccine. Because you see, when the body sees the spike protein, it's not just seeing one antigen, it's not just seeing one entity. It's seeing multiple stretches of what we call antigenic determinant sites. And so essentially, what you're having is that you're having a hyperimmunization. Why do I say hyperimmunization? Because the vaccine comes in such great quantity of spike protein that it induces the body to make a very high amount of antibodies. And these antibodies are binding all over the spike protein. So the virus might mutate and have one part of the spike protein change, but it can't change all the parts of the spike protein, because if it does, it won't be able to enter. So especially the area called the receptor binding domain, which is exactly where the virus makes contact with our cells. There are lots of antibodies made against that area. And as a result of that, that is why these vaccines still work, because you still have so many antibodies that are able to bind to the virus effectively. Now, the thing that gives me pause and that gives me concern is that we could actually get to a place, especially with the way that we're seeing this virus spreading now, where you have a new variant that almost completely escapes that. And then you would need a new vaccine against that. The good news is that vaccines like the mRNA vaccines, you can develop those within a couple of months against a new variant so that it will attack it. But again, in that period of time, a lot of people could be significantly affected.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Webley. I know persons may prefer to type, so no problem. If you don't want to ask it for yourself, I would try and read them. And if I miss any, you could just let me know. All right. What about the persons who are having severe reactions to the vaccine?
Yeah.
Everyone's body is different. So how can I be sure that I won't be badly affected from a vaccine's reaction?
Very good question. And that's something you always have to look out for. Whenever you have a medication, which a vaccine is, there are certain groups of people and certain people who will have a reaction. So let's look into that more closely. What we've seen with the Astrazeneca vaccine is that you have about 1 in every 1 or so million people who develop clots when they get this vaccine. And the demographic is quite specific. It's females below the age of 50 that they've seen this in. Initially, I think they had about 3 or 4 people in Europe who actually died from these blood clots because the doctors just didn't know what they were. Since then, people have developed some of these clots because now you have billions of people who have been vaccinated and several million of people who have gotten this vaccine. But since then, nobody has died. Why? Because even if you develop a clot, the doctors know now to expect it and they can effectively treat it. But it's such a rare event, they would never have picked it up in the clinical trials because clinical trials are done on tens of thousands of people. And this is a 1 in a million, 1 in 1.6 million event. So it's not an overwhelming concern because it is such a rare event. Of course, for the person who has it, it's an important event. But again, we haven't seen anybody having severe issues from clot. You're way more likely to develop clots from COVID, as I showed you before. And it's not clear to me why those clots are developing from these viral vector vaccines. It happened again with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine as well. But there seems to be something there with a viral vector vaccine. This is the same platform, by the way, that Ebola vaccine is made on. But of course, you know, they didn't give out a million doses of the Ebola vaccine. So they didn't see that phenomenon there. So it's something that they're continuing to investigate.
And I would continue. I know lots of questions coming in, so I would do my best, all right? So one just came in here. People messaging privately as well. So what about the persons who are asthmatic? Would you recommend taking the vaccine? And if so, which one? AstraZeneca, Sinopharm, you know, the questions people are asking.
Yeah, I mean, being an asthmatic is not a risk factor for any of the vaccines. So you can get any one of them.
All right. Have these vaccines been studied in people who are pregnant? I mean, the reality is, I know we've only been in this situation just over a year, right? About a year and a half. So, and then the vaccines have been here probably about 9 months or so. So, I mean, I'm just saying, from that standpoint, it's not clinical, but you could answer. Have the vaccines been studied in people who are pregnant?
Yes. So initially, of course, you never do clinical trials on pregnant women if you can avoid it. But what happened is that because they were doing clinical trials on real people, in the process of doing the clinical trials, people got pregnant in the trial, right? And so, you know, they were totally fine. And up to this point now, because the vaccines have been around now for several months, including the clinical trials. Clinical trials started in the middle of 2020. And so it's over a year now that people have been getting these vaccines in one form or another. And so multiple pregnant women have taken these vaccines. I know some of them personally, and these vaccines have proven to be safe for pregnant women. In fact, what they've shown is that when women who are pregnant get the vaccine, it protects their babies because, of course, the IgG antibodies cross the placenta and go into the baby's circulation. So while you're breastfeeding the baby and just after the baby is born, vaginally, the baby is still fine. And so with antibodies, so they've been proven to be safe and effective for pregnant women.
Will a person be able to undergo surgical procedures after taking the vaccine? What are the chances of the anesthetic causing an adverse reaction when coupled with the vaccine?
I haven't seen a specific study on that, but from an immunologic perspective, there's no reason why there should be any interactions, because you have to remember what these vaccines are, right? What they really are pieces of nucleic acid in the form of the Astrazeneca vaccine that you're putting into the body that makes proteins. Both the nucleic acid and the proteins are degraded within days after they're presented. For the Sinopharm vaccine, you're putting in a dead virus that within a few weeks' time, you'll find no trace of it because they're not alive and circulating and staying in the body. In other words, the vaccinate, what you're giving to the individuals, doesn't stick around for any period of time. And it doesn't go around interacting with anything specific, except that now, because the body makes proteins all the time, including the proteins from these very viruses, right? So when you think about it, if an infection with the virus wouldn't cause a certain thing, then you wouldn't expect the spike protein alone or any protein from the virus to do the same. And that's why vaccines are different from many medications. There are medications that you take that accumulate in your system over time and can cause kidney damage and liver damage and stuff like that. That's not true for proteins because proteins are transient. Proteins are degraded. Proteins are broken down, and they have a relatively short lifespan in the body. And so that is why these vaccines don't have effects on multi-organ systems in the body, because these proteins are specifically being broken down and degraded by the immune cells so that they can read the code that is in there and make antibodies against stretches of those codes.
Thank you. Recently in South Korea, with a rare autoimmune disease, had a severe reaction to the vaccine and wheelchair bound. It was not known before that he had the rare condition. So this is just a comment.
Yeah, I don't know what that condition is, but you have to understand what autoimmune disease is. An autoimmune disease is your body specifically targeting a tissue type or a cell type because you've had enough change in that cell, in that tissue, in that protein or nucleic acid that makes it look different from what the immune cells were trained to see as self. One of the greatest jobs of your immune system is to distinguish between self and non-self, right? This is really important. Any immune system that cannot do that, that person can't live a normal life. So your immune system is trained to leave self alone and to go after non-self or whatever is foreign. When you have an autoimmune disease, it's your body attacking itself because it now no longer recognizes self. Self has changed in some way, in a subtle way. Maybe it could be a point mutation where there's one amino acid change or one nucleic acid change that alters the way a protein looks and the body goes after it. So when you think about that is what an autoimmune disease is. The question is, why would you now put something else into the body that's completely unrelated and it would have an impact? So sometimes people say, oh, somebody had an underlying rare autoimmune disease and then had a reaction. The reaction is not coming because there's something inherently bad about the vaccine. But what is the vaccine doing? The vaccine is boosting your immune system, right? It is boosting your immune system so that your immune system can respond to the proteins that the vaccine is making. That boost now creates an inflammation that makes the autoimmune condition worse. So it's not a new condition. It's exacerbation many times of the underlying autoimmune condition. And that can happen probably in any autoimmune disease, but overall, it never really happens because they're so unrelated and that inflammation from the vaccine is so transient overall. So again, you're right where the question is concerned, that you never know if somebody has some type of autoimmune condition, how they're going to respond to having their immune system boosted, right? So people say, oh, you should take these immune boosters. You should take these supplements because they boost the immune system. And I always say it's only amateurs that say that. People who actually understand the immune system never say that, because there are times when you do not want to boost the immune system. And you can take something in that boosts one part of the immune system and suppress the other part. So the immune system is a vast system that is very complicated. And you don't just take one given thing and boost it overall. And nobody would really want to do that.
Thank you. What about the Johnson & Johnson? I didn't hear you speak about that.
Yeah, I didn't speak about it because I didn't see that you are getting it on the island. I don't know if you will.
But the thing is, we have a lot of people who would travel. I would also have family members who would have access to these vaccines, because like right now we could leave the country. Our borders have been reopened so that you can leave. All is required right now to leave. Most places they need a negative PCR test. So so some persons may go somewhere and end up in some airports and just walk and take a vaccine. Who knows?
Sure.
So I guess
the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, right, works exactly the way that the Astrazeneca vaccine works. It's what we call a viral vector vaccine. So essentially, it's the same principle where you're getting the spike protein recipe, the genes for the spike protein, and you're putting it in an adenovirus. The only difference is that in the AstraZeneca vaccine, you're using a chimpanzee adenovirus, and in the Johnson & Johnson, you're using a human adenovirus for that purpose. And again, these are replication incompetent viruses, which mean that when they get into your system, they're not replicating. All they're doing is that they're Trojan horse viruses delivering a payload. And once they do that, they'll die. The cells will kill them after they actually deliver that payload. That payload will be decoded, a messenger RNA made from it. That messenger RNA goes into the cytoplasm of the cell where it's read. The spike protein is made, and the body now responds to it in the same way that it would respond to the mRNA vaccines, which again, you're giving the messenger RNA, it's getting read in the cytoplasm by the ribosome. Spike proteins are being made and spilled out of the cell, and the body is seeing them and saying, hey, this is not supposed to be here. Let's make sure that we are fully aware of it and make both antibodies and memory cells against it.
Thank you again. I'm asking the questions as I get them. A lot of older persons over 50 got heart attacks. Some younger persons experience shedding. And if you want to comment on that, and I would continue. I'll just continue.
I'm not sure what that is.
Right. So I'm not sure of the.
Yeah.
If it's because I know there have been lots of stuff on social media, lots of stuff everywhere where everyone has become an expert.
You know what I'll say about that is what I'll say about that is that COVID doesn't prevent you from dying from natural causes, from old age, from heart disease, from diabetes. And especially when you start off the vaccination campaign by vaccinating all older people have a certain level of death rate across the population over a certain period of time. What you would have to look at now, if you're concerned that the vaccines are killing older people, which I know for a fact they're not, if you're concerned about that, look at the death rate. Has it increased with vaccination? And when they've done that, of course, they've seen that the death rate hasn't increased. However, because again of the law of numbers and of probability, right? If you are vaccinating 1 million people who are over the age of 60 years old, in that group of people, you're going to have people who are going to die after getting the vaccine. It doesn't mean they died from the vaccine. So you'd have to go back now and look at the autopsy report, which is what the CDC does, of course, and what all these reporting agencies do. They go and they look at the autopsy and they say, what killed this person? And so if this person died from a heart disease, that person clearly had an underlying heart condition. It doesn't mean they died from the vaccine. They died from heart disease. They would have died from heart disease anyway. The vaccine can't prevent you from dying from an underlying heart disease because that's not what it was created to do. It was created to prevent you from dying from COVID.
Is it okay for nursing mothers to take the vaccine?
Yes.
All right. How come Johnson & Johnson is 1 dose needed only?
Yeah, because that's how they tested it. You know, Johnson & Johnson vaccine was created so that it would be an easier vaccine. Lots and lots of people have taken the first dose of the Astrazeneca or the Sinopharm or, you know, any one of these mRNA vaccines and just never went back to get the second dose. So they created this vaccine with enough protein making capacity to give you a 70-something% efficacy with one dose, right? It's very likely they gave a second dose, it would go up to over 90% or 80-something%. But they figured that because of the convenience of giving a one-shot vaccine, for example, people traveling and coming to an airport, for example, could get one shot of the Johnson & Johnson. You don't have to worry about them making an appointment to come back. So it was an easier vaccine. And that's why I was disappointed when it started having problems with the clotting issues there. And I think 3 or 4 people died after getting the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, just reducing confidence in it overall, because it was such a smartly done vaccine that would be desirable for a lot of people in remote areas where it's not easy for them to come to town and go to a stadium, for example, to get a vaccine. You go with a one-shot vaccine that doesn't need any deep freeze, that can easily travel in a refrigerated temperature, and you give it to them. But you know, it was created that way, you know, to be a single-shot vaccine.
Thank you. Are these vaccines safe for children, and at what age exactly?
Very good question. So right now, neither the AstraZeneca, the Johnson & Johnson, the Sinopharm vaccine have been approved for children. These vaccines are for people 18 and up or 16 and up in terms of for the Moderna. But at this point, the Pfizer vaccine has been approved for kids 12 years and up. But all of these vaccines, including the ones that you have there now, are actively being tested on children from 6 months old up, so that they can get the right dosage. They can look at safety profiles. The FDA just asked them to expand these studies to include more children so they can get more data, and which means that if there are any adverse events, they'll be able to pick these up. So these trials are actively ongoing. But at this point in time, there's no vaccine approved for kids under 12.
Thank you. Is the vaccine safe for persons with autism, especially if the autistic person is nonverbal and would be able to indicate if they are having difficulty, like example, pains and so on?
Yeah, it's absolutely safe for them. Lots of autistic individuals have gotten the vaccine. For those who have gotten a vaccine at a center, if you know, they allow you to, they ask you to wait for at least half an hour, 15 minutes to half an hour after you've gotten the vaccine shot. At least that's what they do here before you leave. And so they're able to observe you. You have a nurse there, nurse practitioner who observe you to make sure that you're safe and you're okay before you leave. So you can easily tell if somebody's in respiratory distress, even if they're nonverbal. You can easily tell if something is going on there that's not what you typically would expect.
All right. Good evening, and thank you for the information. My question is, why are so many doctors coming forward and talking against the vaccines? Is there something outside the vaccine that they may have insight on that we may have missed?
Yeah, you know, I just looked at the statistics today, and 96% of all doctors have gotten vaccinated. So clearly, the vast majority of physicians, MDs, trust and take one or of these vaccines that are out there. Here is what a lot of us seem not to understand. And again, I'm in a unique position because I help to prepare people for medical school. Medical school cause people to specialize, right? And that is where the issue comes up. Not everybody is an infectious disease doctor, right? If you're not specialized in pediatrics and specialize in infectious disease and immunology, then you have to go back and do your homework as a doctor. If you spend so here's how medical training works. You spend 4 years in medical school doing general training, and then you spend another 2 years or more, depending on what your specialty is, doing residency. Residency is actually where you get licensed to be a particular type of physician. So when you finish your residency, you probably forget the vast majority of general material that you learned in medical school because you're so focused and so specialize in your area of specialty. So if you're a dermatologist, you know, or if you are a gynecologist, you might not necessarily know that much about vaccines and how they're made and the immune system, because I've seen those very students struggle in my immunology classes. The mistake that we make as a general public, we believe that because somebody has an MD after their name means that they're versed in immunology and infectious disease and vaccine development. They're not. It doesn't mean they can't learn, but they have to go back and make a concerted effort to learn that material, to understand the material. Those are the individuals who you see go out there and speak against the vaccines because they don't understand it. It scares them that it was developed so quickly, and they don't understand the mechanism because they don't have enough background to appreciate it. And all they had to do was just spend a little time doing exactly what I did this evening. Go back and look at the basic biology, look at the immunobiology, and it would make sense to them because these are individuals who did science in college. You know, they did at least the basic biology, chemistry, physics, math in college, so they have a basis where they can understand this. Now, I'm yet to see a serious infectious disease physician, somebody who's actually looked from the northern end of a microscope south at viruses growing in a cell or in a group of cells or in an organ or a tissue, seeing microbes destroying cells and tissues. I'm yet to see one of those people who's like me, who spent so many decades looking at these things. Just this week, looking at cells being destroyed by viruses and bacteria. Then you know what these things are capable of doing. And you know that when you tell somebody that they shouldn't take these vaccines, that they should go take ivermectin or hydrochloroquine that have not been proven in any trial to work against these viruses, that you're signing these people's death sentence, especially if they actually have underlying conditions. So I'm yet to meet a serious physician who is trained in this thing, who comes and says, oh, these vaccines are not safe because I've seen this and that. What I've seen is a lot of people bearing false witness. I've seen a lot of people going and parroting right-wing media and anti-vaxxers saying, oh, the vaccines are killing people in the thousands. I mean, I live in a state where 70% of the people have been vaccinated. Nearly 80% of the people are vaccinated. Pretty much everybody around me is vaccinated. I'm yet to see a single person die from a vaccine or have severe adverse reactions from a vaccine that send them in the hospital. What I've seen is lots of people who I know, including friends, family members, church members, die from COVID, right? I'm yet to see one of them die from a vaccine. So again, you have to be able to sort through these myths. And unfortunately, it's very confusing when somebody with an MD behind their name who does not state their specialty, right? Who does not state their specialty and couldn't tell you which T cell type boosts B cells. They couldn't tell you which cytokines or transcription factors are produced to give you the type of immune response you have. They don't know how to sort through these cells, what the receptors are on their surfaces. That's something that I know the way I know the back of my hand. Why? Because this is what I do, right? If this was a conversation about dermatology, I wouldn't be here. It's not my specialty. If this was a conversation about cardiology, I would not be the person that Jan would call, because that is not my specialty. What I do and what I know is infectious diseases. I know them very intimately because I've worked with them for so many decades that I can almost predict, for the most part, what they're going to do.
Thank you for sharing. Can you expand or explain emergency use versus full authorization?
Yeah. So, you know, let's say you're driving home and you see a police car driving along. If there's no emergency, the police car drives at the regular rate of speed. It obeys the traffic laws, stops at a stoplight just the way you do. But if that car gets a call that, hey, there's an accident down the road, what's going to happen? They're going to put on the sirens, and if you have a courteous population, people pull to the side of the road so that the police car can go through, even if the light is red. They cautiously approach that red light, but they go through it. right? Because you're supposed to stop and allow it. That's the emergency use of a first responding vehicle. Same thing for an ambulance. You don't want an ambulance coming to you when you're sick to sit in traffic and obey every traffic law. Those rules weren't created at the time when you had an emergency. They were created prior to you having an emergency. That is what emergency use authorization is. It's a system that was put in place many, many, many decades ago that says that if we ever have an emergent situation, there is a process for you to quickly develop therapeutics that can be deployed to people in a short period of time after being evaluated for safety and efficacy so that people's lives can be saved. Now, the FDA has a specific process for you to get full licensure, and it requires 6 months, at least 6 months of data to be accumulated. And it requires the FDA visiting the site that is making the vaccine and evaluating every step of the process for good manufacturing process, the GMPs, to make sure that there is no breakdown of communication, to make sure that everything is safe and they're following all of the rules and laws that they have put in their filing that they're going to do. That is what takes time. So people have said, why is it that the FDA hasn't approved, fully licensed these vaccines? It's because the FDA has a process of how to do that. There has to be 6 months of data. Now they have 6 months of data, more than 6 months of data. But 6 months of data is not something you evaluate in one day. So the FDA has had 6 months of data, but it's taking the FDA about 2 months or more to evaluate that 6 months of data. That's a lot of information that they have to sort through, and they have to do their due diligence. And then they have to go and visit the sites. They have to have representatives that visit these vaccine sites. So what I'll say is that from now until the end of the fall, you're going to have full licensure of some of these vaccines because they're going to go through that process of full authorization after the evaluation period is over.
I'll just add, and you let me know if I'm accurate. So we might be okay now, and then there's a hurricane coming, and then there's this disaster preparedness team that comes into action. They're not there all the time in the forefront, but now there's a sort of national emergency.
Right.
And now they just bypass all the other rules, and then they come in now to function to get that essentially take care of the disaster.
Absolutely.
Is that something like what happened in this case?
It is very similar, and it doesn't mean they're breaking any rules.
No,
it doesn't mean that they're being unsafe. They have been trained for this. They have been prepared for this, right? And so that is what people don't get. They think, oh, yes, these are experimental vaccines. Well, every medication continues to be an experimental medication as long as people keep taking it. That's why they can figure out that, hey, this drug that they created for this type of cancer actually works for the next one, because they continue to study it. In fact, as part of the FDA rules, every vaccine company has to follow the people in their clinical trials for at least 2 years, right? Regardless of when you actually get approval.
All right, and we have a few questions inside. So we're going to ask about a few of them together. Are the Cuban vaccines different from the others? That's one.
Yeah.
I'll ask the next one time. You spoke about the booster vaccination for the different variants. Is it a safe practice?
Yeah. So the Cuban vaccines, they have a number of them, but they're all built on a similar technology. They actually built off the spike protein technology, where they're actually using the spike protein. I think I had it in one of my slides, I think. I probably just blew past it. But essentially, these are vaccines that are created using the spike protein, presented in pretty much similar way that I showed you. And right now, they have a new vaccine that they just approved in Cuba, just approved one. They had one that was previously approved that they've developed for their people. Cuba actually has a pretty nice vaccine setup where they have made a number of vaccines over the years to be really self-sufficient. I haven't seen a lot of published data on their vaccine. So they say it has about a 70-something% efficacy. I haven't seen that yet. So in other words, it has a similar efficacy as a Sinopharm vaccine, is the report coming out of Cuba. I haven't seen, again, a lot of their publications, just press releases on their vaccine efficacy, but I have no reason to disbelieve that their vaccines are working efficiently. And so,
Go ahead.
yeah.
Go ahead, continue.
In terms of the booster, for vaccination, the booster is never going to do you anything. You're not going to have all of a sudden a booster is unsafe, because in fact, when you get a vaccine where you get one dose and then you get a second dose, that second dose is actually called a booster, right? So that's what that second dose is. It's a booster. If you get a third dose, that's also a booster, right? So what people are debating right now is whether or not we actually need a booster. And my answer to that is it depends on who you are. If you're someone who is older and has a less robust immune system, you probably need a booster. If you're someone who has had an organ transplant, which means that you'll be on immunosuppressive therapy, in order for you to not reject the organ, they keep you on some type of steroid that dampens the immune system, so the immune system doesn't go after the kidney or the liver or whatever has been transplanted in you, which means that under those circumstances, when you get 2 shots of vaccine, it's probably not going to give you the level of antibodies. In fact, it won't give you the level of antibodies that somebody at the same age who doesn't have those underlying issues would get. So I would say it is very likely that for those individuals, a booster would be necessary. Maybe somebody who has had chemotherapy in cancer and it has destroyed some of their immune cells, they might need a booster. But if you're 18 to 50 years old and in relatively good health and don't have some underlying immune deficiency disease, you probably don't need a booster yet. In fact, I've seen 0 data that says that the regular population actually needs a booster. The variants so far have not overcome these vaccines. All of these vaccines have been very effective at preventing hospitalization and death when exposed to COVID.
This person might have missed the early part of the presentation. Does COVID-19 affect the lung or the lungs?
Yeah.
And I would go into the other one time. We understand that it is said that any vaccine is the best vaccine. But if given a chance to choose which of the 2 vaccines should be taken, if presently it is believed that a person has an autoimmune disease.
Yeah. So yes, COVID absolutely affects your lung. Your lung, of all the organs in your system, your lung probably is the one that takes the brunt of the damage from COVID, causes these consolidations of mucus in your lungs, make it difficult to breathe, and that drops your oxygen saturation. In other words, the amount of oxygen that's circulating in your blood, and you have to get oxygen supplementation because of that. And if that's not working, that's why they put you on a ventilator. A ventilator actually forces oxygen into your lungs, into your body mechanically. If you had a choice, which vaccine would you take if you had an autoimmune condition? I would say because of the few cases that they've seen with people with underlying autoimmune conditions having greater side effects from the Astrazeneca vaccine, I would take the Sinopharm, the killed vaccine, if I had to make that choice personally. But again, the best vaccine is the one in the syringe sitting right in front of you if you need a vaccine to be taken.
All right. Someone was just commenting, actually, we have no way of verifying whether all of them are in fact MDs. That's concerning those who are commenting on, who are commenting on anti-vaccines and so on. All right. Hi, are the vaccines safe for an individual who suffers from petit-mal seizures and have a high allergic reaction to eggs?
Yeah, so the vaccines don't have any eggs in them. They don't have any preservatives in them, in fact. So none of these vaccines actually have that much of a preservative. Your Sinopharm vaccine actually has an adjuvant in it that is designed to stimulate the immune response, but that doesn't have any egg products in it. So I would say if egg is your allergic substance, then you don't have an issue. But if you feel that there's something in your health history that might be problematic, I would suggest strongly that you talk with your doctor before you get the vaccine so that you can be confident of that. And if you're still fearful, what I always say to people who are concerned about allergic responses is choose a site that is a hospital to get your vaccine. Choose a site where there's an EpiPen. so that if you actually have an allergic reaction to a vaccine, you're okay. And you should know as well that there are people, many people, who have had an allergic reaction to the first dose of the vaccine, and we're still able to get the second dose because they actually have a mechanism for that. They just give you smaller amounts of it at one time going in. So, there are ways to do that, and people who give vaccines are very effective at giving you the doses that are going to keep you safe overall.
How credible is Mike Yeadon's Pfizer vice president position? I don't know if you're aware of the position. I am not. Are you?
Yeah, I guess his position is that these vaccines are unsafe and the government is not telling you. It just sounds like somebody who got fired and is bitter. Because again, what he's saying doesn't jive with what we see in the data set. You can't go against the data set. And what the data is showing over and over again. I got the Pfizer vaccine. I'm still here. I have no effects. My 12-year-old got the Pfizer vaccine, still fine. Everybody who I know who has gotten that vaccine is fine. And again, as I showed you, 4-point-something billion people worldwide have gotten the vaccine. So again, you can't hide something that's affecting any number of people in 4.4 billion doses, right? Nobody would have to tell you that people are dropping dead or people are having these reactions. You would see it. It would be all over the news, the same way everything else is all over the news. And the people who say this always say, oh, the government is not telling you. Government doesn't make vaccines, right? Scientists do. And the government is not in charge of this information. Scientists are. People investigate this stuff, peer review it, and publish it on a daily basis. That stuff is not hidden. In this day and age, you can't even keep what's going on in your bedroom secret. How do you think you're going to keep something like that secret? Somebody's going to find out. So you can be assured that what your eyes are seeing is true. So for the people who say to me, oh, these vaccines are dangerous because they're killing people and the government is not telling you, my question to them always is, how did you get the information if the government is not telling? Where did you get your information from? And these people always get stuck there because they have no information. They're just picking up on rumors that people are spreading around the web, which unfortunately just thrives with this type of stuff. It just gets spread around WhatsApp so readily that it leaves some people confused most of the times. But again, that is why I give you this type of biological basis so that you can understand this. If you understand this, then somebody can dupe you into believing something that's not true.
Thanks again. We have about I have about 26 questions, right? I'm going to try to see what we could do. Question: is there a period of time whereby if the second shot is not taken, that you would have to restart the process by taking the first shot again? They usually advise that the second shot is taken about 6 weeks later. Yeah,
you won't have to restart the process because remember I showed you the primary and secondary response. You would always have had the primary response from the first shot whenever you got it. And then it's just a matter of boosting you for the second shot. Now, it might not get to the level of efficacy that they initially reported because that efficacy was reported at that 6-week mark. So, it might be a little above or a little below depending on when you got the shot, but it's not going to do you anything. You're still going to be boosted.
Thank you. Taken from the CDC site, CDC monitoring reports of myocarditis, hope I pronounced that correctly, and pericarditis. CDC has received increased reports of myocarditis and the other in adolescents and young adults after COVID-19 vaccination. The known and potential benefits of COVID-19 vaccination outweigh the known and potential risks, including the possible risks of myocarditis and pericarditis.
Yeah, so that this is true that the CDC has reported because the CDC has this database. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has this database that is set up for people to report any adverse events from vaccines. Everything is taken in, no verification. It doesn't mean that the thing is caused by the vaccine, and then CDC investigates. What they've seen is that in some of the young adults who are getting the vaccine, those between 12 to 18 especially, or 12 to 20, is that a small group of those individuals are having myocarditis or pericarditis. In other words, they're having an inflammation of the heart muscle after getting the RNA vaccines. And the way I interpret that, because myocarditis and pericarditis is something you get, for example, if you have a severe inflammation from like a viral or bacterial infection, you can get that. These are not things that typically kill you. They're things you're able to get over. So for some people, they might have to be hospitalized depending on how severe it is. But I think what is happening is that if you have to remember that kids like my son at 12 years old, he got the same vaccine dose that I got as an adult. And that's the way they tested it. It seemed fine, and they approved it for use. My thought is that that dose probably needs to be reduced a little bit. Because I think what is happening, kids typically don't need this as high a dose as we do in order to make a strong immune response. And so that's what they're testing now in the under 12 kids. They're actually significantly reducing the dose. Maybe about 1/3 of the dose is what they would give to those kids. If you get a dose that is too high, what can happen is that it can cause a widespread inflammation. And that inflammation can turn into a myocarditis or a pericarditis, where you actually have that inflammation in the heart muscle or around the space of the heart. So again, these are things that they're figuring out on the fly, and they're realizing that in rare cases, they're actually seeing that happening.
Thanks again. I'm just reading the questions as I get them, all right? So I'm not proofreading to really, but does the vaccine have anything to do with the New World Order or any type of spiritual scenario? That's one. And in all of science, boosters are never given within the very short time frame that they are requiring a booster for the COVID vaccines. We could take those two.
Yeah. So I from my spiritual perspective, I don't see any link between, any sort of new world order and spirituality and the vaccines. People who say that are people who have this conspiracy theory that the vaccines have some nefarious thing behind it, that there are microchips in them and that they're tracking you. For what purpose, people can't tell you, but they've conflated a lot of religious misgivings and fear with the vaccines. I've seen none of that. This is not the mark of the beast or anything like that. Where the booster is concerned, I totally disagree here. Again, as I said, boosters are given within 3 weeks of getting a shot, because we know, for example, when I immunize animals in our test, we typically boost them within 3 weeks of getting the first shot, or within a month or 6 weeks of getting the shot. So that's when a booster is typically given. Where a third shot is concerned, like for COVID that people are talking about, maybe that's what the question is actually addressing, where some people are now saying after you've gotten those 2 shots, you now should get a third shot. Yes, I've never seen any vaccine that has been needed for a boost in that time period apart from the flu. So again, there's no data. What I'm looking at, is that who are the people who got the vaccine first? And those were healthcare workers who started getting vaccinated, like my wife. My wife got vaccinated in December of last year, right? And so for those people, are their immunity waning? In other words, when you're seeing breakthrough infections, are breakthrough infections more common in the people who got the vaccine back in December of last year compared to people who got it in April of this year? And there's no difference. What the 6-month data showed was there was something like a 6% drop in efficacy, which is clearly not a reason for you to get a booster. So again, in my opinion, in my scientific opinion, there is no reason for a booster at this point in the general population, just in people who might be immunocompromised or have underlying conditions that make their immune system not fire as well.
Thanks again. What are the mid and long-term effects of COVID-19 vaccines, if there are any, really? And after having the virus, should you be vaccinated? Yeah.
So again, vaccines don't have long-term side effects. If you can go back over history and name me one vaccine that has a long-term side effect, then you can worry about COVID. Remember, I told you the reason for that. The reason for that is that vaccines are presenting to the body something that's degradable. A protein killed, or attenuated strain of something that gets degraded over time. In other words, everything that you give in a vaccine has a shelf life. So that's why you don't have any long-term side effects. So when the FDA went back and evaluated data over the past 50 to 100 years of vaccines, what they found was that there was no vaccine that had any side effect after 6 weeks of getting the vaccine. That's as long as you see it, right? And that makes perfect sense scientifically. So having long-term side effects from vaccine is not something that is at all expected. That would be completely out of the norm because, again, you get degraded. If you get infected naturally by the virus, should you get vaccinated? Yes. And I explained the reason a little bit, but let me expand on that a little bit more. When your body gets a natural infection from the virus, what your body is seeing is equivalent to maybe, and I describe it this way all the time, a 10-story building, right? Why do I say that? Because your body is seeing all of those 30 proteins that the virus produces. And it is responding to all of those 30 proteins. And each protein probably have 30 to 50 sites that the body is responding to. In other words, you're having thousands of reactions in the body, thousands of different clones of cells responding to it. Now, here's the thing. The vast majority of those proteins, those non-structural proteins from NS1 to NS13, even the polymerase protein, they're not necessary for the entry of the virus. The only protein that is important for the entry of the virus is your spike protein. What the vaccines do is the vaccines don't show the body all of this plethora of proteins. It shows that the one protein that is important, that lock, that key that the virus uses to unlock your cells, the spike protein. So instead of spending time worried about all of these other proteins, the body focuses on this one protein and makes a robust response against it so that when you see the virus again, your body is very much prepared to neutralize it and prevent it from entering. While in the case of you getting infected, the body is seeing all of these proteins, like a 10-story building, as I mentioned. Every ledge, every window, every balcony, every door jamb, when all it needs to focus on is the front door, which is the spike protein. That's what the vaccine does. It says, don't worry about those other things. I'm not even going to show them to you. Worry about the spike protein.
Thank you. This is a good question. I think what we're going to do is probably just go through about 10 more minutes of questions.
Okay.
And we'll see what we could do. All right. We try and save the questions here. And who knows, Dr. Webley, we'll see how we could get the responses out to people and so on.
Sure.
We're really happy. This is not part of the time, okay? We'll take the 10 minutes after I speak. But it's a good question that's coming up here that I also had a thought of, because you don't test people before you get a vaccine. And so the question here is, if you're unaware that you have COVID-19 and you take the vaccine, what happens?
If you are unaware that you have COVID and you got the vaccine at the same time, it means that you were asymptomatic. So all that will happen is that you'll get a boost. In fact, what I should have said in the previous question, and it ties to this one, is that what the data has shown now is that for people who have gotten COVID, when they get one dose of your Astrazeneca vaccine, for example, it gives you a level of protection that 2 doses would give in somebody who was not infected. So there is a big push now where people are saying for people who have gotten COVID, you probably only need 1 dose of the vaccine. In the second question, it's a little bit nuanced because it would all depend on how long you had it, because it could very well mean that your body hasn't yet started building that response to get boosted by the vaccine. So you'll be doing them in tandem. It would mean that you'll probably feel a little bit sick. If you're asymptomatic initially, you'll probably feel a little bit sicker because the vaccine is going to drive that inflammation. But it doesn't mean that it's going to kill you if you didn't have underlying conditions and if you weren't already going to be really, really sick. The vaccine is going to make you sicker.
Can a fully vaccinated people die from COVID?
Absolutely. Vaccines are not 100% protective. Even the best vaccines that we have, and some of these mRNA vaccines, for example, are like 94% efficacious, but then there's that 6%, right? That 6% of the times it might not protect you from hospitalization and death. So with so many people getting infected, you're going to come up on people who potentially get COVID, and if they have underlying conditions especially, because now we're seeing it, right? We're seeing it here. that the people who are vaccinated fully and end up at the hospital after getting COVID are the people who have underlying conditions and over the age of 65, 70. So those are the people who would be more likely to die from COVID if they got the vaccine and still didn't have that maximum protection. And again, that's why for that population, getting a booster might be something that one wants to think about, because if that protection is not at the level that's going to keep them out of the hospital, then you'd want to look at that.
Why are people saying that unvaccinated people are dangerous when we know unvaccinated cannot infect anyone unless they get COVID?
Because unvaccinated people, when they get infected, they have a much higher viral load. The vaccine keeps the viral load down. That's why you don't get sick. So when an unvaccinated person gets infected, they have so many viruses in their throat and in their nostrils and in their lungs that they're now releasing into the environment, that they now have the ability to infect a vaccinated person. It would be very highly unlikely for a vaccinated person to infect another vaccinated person. It's way easier for an unvaccinated person to infect a vaccinated person because you have to overcome that threshold. And especially with the new Delta variant, one unvaccinated person can infect upwards of 8 people with the virus, as opposed to the original strain where you would only infect like 2 people. So that's the reason why that distinction is made.
Does the vaccine contain graphene oxide?
Not at all. Again, this is the conspiracy, the newest form of the conspiracy theory. And let's say it had in graphene oxide. It would still defeat the purpose for why the anti-vaxxers are saying this, because they're saying, oh, they put the graphene oxide in there, which of course is a tracking device. And of course, you know, it's going to lead to cancer or some other nefarious thing. Well, even if you have graphene oxide in your body, you can track somebody with that. You know, it's a part of the material that you use to make some type of chips. But if you don't have a chip reader close by, none of that works. You know, you don't just walk past a store and they read your chip in your credit card, right? You have to put it in a device or close to a device for it to read it. So again, these really, in my opinion, really stupid theories defy logic. And I would say any well-meaning person who has read up a little bit will know that this is just coming from a place where people are trying to confuse you. You see, the anti-vax movement has a strategy. They throw so much falsehood at you, hoping that at least something will resonate with you, some fear that you have, some underlying fear that you have will pop out, and then you'll decide not to get vaccinated. What's the alternative? If you don't get the vaccine, what are you going to use to protect yourself? What's their theory? What is their cure?
Every other month or so, there are reports from the CDC of new science regarding the vaccine's protectiveness. Why is there seemingly contradictory reports of persons vaccinated or not ability to spread COVID-19 and its variants?
Because the virus is evolving, right? The original virus strain could not be transmitted between vaccinated people or even from an unvaccinated person to a vaccinated person, right? That didn't happen. But then came a more transmissible variant. So what the CDC is doing, the CDC could do a better job with its communication, but it's doing what scientists do. You follow the data, right? So the CDC came out a few weeks ago and said, if you're vaccinated, you still need to wear a mask. Why? Because in my state of Massachusetts, just about 2 hours from where I live, there was a gathering over the July 4th weekend of vaccinated and unvaccinated people. And 74% of the 400 and something people who got infected in those gatherings were vaccinated people. You're like, what? That had to happen before. And then when they checked, they realized that in the throats of vaccinated people, they had just as much Delta variant as they had in the unvaccinated people. So that's why CDC came and changed the guidelines and said, I know we told you that if you're vaccinated, you don't need to wear a mask. However, with this new variant, we've seen that people who are vaccinated can still get the virus and can still have tons of this new variant in your throats. And here's what will happen. If we get a new variant that is even worse than this one, you will have a change in the mask guidelines as well, because you have to update the science as the biology change. And the biology is the virus. The virus is changing. So you have to change the science to go along with it. It doesn't mean that the CDC doesn't know what it's doing. It doesn't mean that the CDC is wrong. You just have to follow the logic. If the virus has changed, the CDC will be negligent not to inform the public of that.
I'm worried about my daughter's father, who years ago had a recurring condition where his platelets dropped. I don't know if you've seen that word, thrombocytopenia. That's right. Can he take the vaccine?
Yeah, I mean, initially, if you remember the news coming out from the Astrazeneca vaccine in Europe, they found rare cases. But again, these rare cases were in females under the age of 50, where they were seeing these thrombocytopenic conditions where, you have this low platelet count, below 50,000 or even lower than that. You just haven't seen that in the general public. So I would say as a male, the chances of him getting any sort of thrombocytopenic purpura out of getting the vaccine is very low. And so the vaccine should be safe for him to take. However, now that you know that there's a probability, a very low probability, but still a probability of having that thrombocytopenic episode, then you'd want to make sure that this is a person who, after getting the vaccine, if they have any signs of physical discomfort, that they immediately go to their doctors and say, hey, I got the vaccine and I'm feeling a little bit weak, or I got this scratch and it's continuing to bleed. Go ahead and check my platelet count.
Oh, thank you. I think my list that just jumped there for some reason. All right, I'm going on. If the virus is evolving, then why not stop vaccinating people against the original virus? Why vaccinate against a changed virus?
Because what I just explained is that the vaccine that was created against the sequence of the original virus, while the virus is changing, the virus can't change completely. Why? Because it still needs to be able to bind to the spike protein to get in. That hasn't changed, right? In other words, the fundamental binding site of the virus has not changed. While it's changed different sequences, different protein sequences, the 376, 378, the 488 site of its amino acid, there are parts that it just cannot change. In other words, you can file down little parts of your key and it still fits into the lock in your house. But if you file off the first groove completely, it won't fit in the lock anymore, which means that you can't get into the house, which is what would happen to the virus. So while it's changing these little tiny parts, it hasn't fundamentally changed the original blueprint of the binding site. And that is why the original vaccine still works. If the vaccines didn't work, you would know, right? What the data is showing over and over again is that these vaccines are preventing you from getting into the hospital and from dying from COVID. So that's why the vaccine is still being used, because the variant is not a new strain of the virus, it's a variant of the virus. In other words, the change is too small for it to create a whole new strain of the virus. It's a variant of the virus. Variant means it's a little change, but lots of the backbone is still there.
What about erectile dysfunction and low spore count in COVID-19 patients? Is this study generalizable?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen, I know that there have been a few publications, really reports, not really publications, peer-reviewed publications that have said that people who have COVID have had erectile dysfunction. I just haven't seen it in broad print. So I don't know that it's something that's happening with any regularity. I just haven't seen any large publications on this.
So if persons who are vaccinated can contract the virus so easily, why isn't the CDC not looking at vaccines as being ineffective? I know you mentioned the Delta just now. I don't know if you want to respond to this or if it's something you believe that you answered already.
Yeah, what people keep forgetting is what I keep repeating, right? What I keep repeating is that the vaccines work, right? So far, I would say we got lucky with these vaccines because even though the variant has changed, what we haven't seen yet is vaccine escape. Vaccines are not designed to prevent infection. No vaccine. The mumps, measles, rubella, None of those vaccines prevent infection. What they prevent is disease. Disease is different from infection because here's the thing. What the vaccine did was prepare your immune system for when the virus does what? Enter your system. If the virus doesn't enter your system, your immunity can't work. Vaccines don't create a bubble around you. What they create are cells and proteins inside of you, which means that you have to get infected for it to work. What it does when you get infected is that it actively fights the infection so that you don't get the disease symptoms and you don't getting hospitalized and die from it. So when you say, if people who are vaccinated still get infected, why is the CDC still vaccinating? They're vaccinated because the vaccines are doing exactly what they were created to do. They were created to prevent hospitalization and death, not necessarily to prevent infection, right? Because that's a completely different thing in the Efficacy platform. I hope that helps, because that's a fundamental thing that people have to realize. No medicine, even prophylactic antibiotics, they don't prevent you from getting infected because they can't work outside of your body. They work inside of you.
Thank you. And I think probably just down to our last question. And so it was probably answered before, this person might have missed it. Does the vaccine help your immune system or it breaks it down in the long run?
No vaccine ever breaks down your immune system. Vaccines are designed to educate your immune system, right? They educate your immune system. The great thing about our immune system is so robust, so multi-layered, so very effective. So in essence, here's the thing. There is this false choice that the anti-vaccine movement would have you make between the vaccine or your immune system. That is such a silly thing, because if you don't have a functioning immune system, vaccines don't work, right? So what the vaccines do is that the vaccines educate your immune system to say, hey, this is what to expect. And when you actually get the infection, what is it that's clearing the infection? Your immune system, right? So that's what people need to realize. The vaccine doesn't replace your immune system. It augments your immune system. It prepares your immune system to fight against a serious infection. You need to realize this. So, people say, oh, natural immunity versus getting a vaccine. Well, if you wait to be naturally infected by a dangerous virus, you might not live for your immune system to actually develop immunity against it. So that's why you prime your immune system. You tell it to expect it, because who wants to be surprised? When your immune system gets surprised with an infection that it has never gotten before, like COVID, then what we see with a lot of people is that your immune system gets so frightened, it jumps out of its skin and it starts producing all of these things that end up killing you. I describe it this way. Let's say you have a really good alarm system that's tantamount to your immune system. At home, we have this fantastic alarm system. And we're going to bed at night. It's my job to turn on the alarm. I turn on the alarm, I go to my bed, and I know that if you pop a window, a door, or anything at all, that alarm is going to go off unless you punch in the code within a very few seconds. Now, let's say I wake up in the middle of the night and I don't hear any alarm going off, but there's somebody standing over me in my bedroom, with a mask on, ready to rob me. In my fright and surprise, I either freeze and do nothing, or in an attempt to protect my wife and our children, I start throwing everything at him. So I take up my Bible off the nightstand and I throw it at him. I take up my phone that's beside me and I throw it at him. I throw pillows and blankets and whatever your hand can catch. And that's essentially what the immune system does in many of these COVID patients. This virus breaks down that initial innate security system. And when it gets in, but by the time your adaptive immune system comes around, it's like, whoa, what's going on here? How did so many of you get in here? How is it that no alarms are going on? And so the adaptive immune system throws everything it's got at this disease. And that is what is known as a cytokine storm. These are chemical messengers, text messages that are being sent to so many people that it breaks the network, right? You ever hear people breaking the internet because so many messages are being sent? That's what happens with your immune system. And by the time it levels out, number one, the virus has caused tremendous damage. And number two, your immune system has caused even more damage. And most people just never recover from that. That's why you get vaccinated. The vaccine makes sure that your immune system is not surprised. It gets a specific dose that it can handle of a non-lethal protein that it can now build an immune response against, so that you never get surprised when that intruder comes in. You're ready and waiting for them at the door with a cricket bat, so you can knock them out before they actually get into your house, right? You pull a Brian Lara on them because you're vaccinated.
Interesting that you mentioned cricket bat, because you currently live in the US, right?
Yes.
And many persons may feel that you are from the US, and originally you're from
Jamaica.
All right then.
I'm from Jamaica.
So you mentioned cricket. So for those who might have expected you to say baseball, you realize that you're a Caribbean boy. And I'll ask this final question, and then you could give your closing comments. All right?
Sure.
Since the common flu has killed so many people every year, why don't employers use yearly vaccinations for the flu as a criteria for employment, as they now seem to be doing with COVID-19? What's the real difference?
Yeah. So again, you probably have the luxury of working for an employer who doesn't require it. But if you work here in healthcare, any healthcare facility, you have to get the flu shot. It's mandated, right? And so I think, the flu is different. COVID is not the flu. COVID is way more contagious and way more deadly compared to the flu. So there's no comparison there. We're in the middle of a very serious pandemic. And people have to remember that. And employers are looking and thinking to themselves, I'm going to lose productivity. If I have people who are not protected and they come in, they could transmit COVID to my entire staff. And my entire place has to shut down again. People could die. I could get sued. And all of these things are what people are thinking. Moreover, we complain about vaccine passport because people are calling it a passport. But when they didn't call it a passport, we're totally fine with it. As Caribbean people, we all had to get vaccines to go to school, right? And for those of you who have traveled to the US, people gladly went and got their vaccinations when they went to the embassy and got a visa, right? Because they know they needed their vaccinations in order to travel. For specific jobs, if you're in healthcare in Trinidad and Tobago, you need to get your hepatitis shot before you're able to work in healthcare there. So again, there are specific vaccines that have always been required by one group or another. Now, having said that, let me say that I don't believe in vaccine mandates. I don't believe that the government should mandate vaccines. I feel that it's a personal decision and people should be given the opportunity to make that decision. I think right now there's been a lot of frustration with people who are vaccine hesitant. And I think there needs to be some patience. Then, and sometimes I'm guilty of it too. I get a little bit frustrated that people are not understanding. But I think what we need to do is that we need to do exactly what we did this evening, over and over and over and over again, until we answer people's questions. People who have questions, whether they got it from some conspiracy website or they have personal misgivings, we should sit with them and answer their questions, not in some big forum, but at their dinner tables, on their porch, on their veranda, in the neighborhood, at the community centers, in school buildings. Talk with people about why these vaccines are safe and why we find them efficacious and why it is that it's important for people to get vaccinated. Convince people that these are good things to take and let them see their neighbors getting it and not getting sick and dying. And let them do that. I think that we've become a little too impatient all over with spending time and explaining this to people. And that's just my opinion. I just hate forcing a medication on somebody when they're clearly uncomfortable with it for one reason or the other. It doesn't matter what the reason really is. I think if somebody's willing to learn You have people who are just completely anti-vax and they're never going to accept what you say. Put that aside. That's a very small number of people. That's less than 5% of the world's population, right? So the vast majority of people who are not getting vaccinated, it's not because they're anti-vax. It's because they're vaccine hesitant. And I think those people can be reached. I think those people can be reasoned with. I think it just requires them having people who they trust, giving them that information. So I think their doctors need to give them that information. Their nurses need to give them that information. Healthcare workers need to give that information, as opposed to politicians who we've grown to lack trust in over time because of promises made and not kept. So, that's just my little editorializing and maybe sermonizing at the end.
And we want to thank you for taking the time. And John,
you're muted.
I realize. My apologies. I want to thank you for taking the time to share with us this evening. I said the purpose of this was just have a closer look at the vaccine so that we could have a better understanding of how this is formed, and with everything that happens outside there, we don't have a crystal ball and we don't have all the answers in the world. But the intention ideally was just for us to get a little closer insight, as you have done research for years. You teach this, and you have been you prepare students for the medical fraternity, and we're happy to have you share this with us this evening. And of course, I see one popping back in here. John, I'll hand it over to you now, and I would just ask that last question that I just saw: should people who refuse to get vaccines and get sick still be treated at hospitals in the same way as others who have other serious health complications?
Absolutely. I mean, what are we going to do? Hospitals are designed to treat sick people. And if you decide not to get vaccinated and you get infected, you should be treated and given the very best care that you can get. What we're seeing here over and over now, if you turn on the US news and if you get it on YouTube or something, you'll see people go in having downplayed the virus, downplayed the vaccine, say that they're not safe, say all sorts of things, and then they get infected, but they're taken care of. The problem is that, number one, when you do that, you're stressing out the healthcare system. And there's going to come a time when you don't have enough beds to treat an accident victim because you're treating all COVID patients. Now, that would become a bad situation. But you need to treat people if they're sick. That's why hospitals exist. I just want to say we should be people who care for people. We have to get to the place where we care more about people than we care about our opinions. We have to love people more than we love hearing the sound of our voices or love hearing our opinions expressed by somebody else. The goal is to do no harm. The goal is to do no harm. And that's why I do this. I tell you what I know, and what I don't know, I leave alone, and I can give you a source to find it, or I'll tell you straight up, I just don't know, because I am not going to give you information that is false. But what I see from where I sit, I see nurses and doctors being burnt out taking care of COVID patients. And if you think that wearing a mask is challenging and difficult, and getting a vaccine or a booster is terrible, try getting intubated. That's no fun at all. That's no fun at all. So people have to be thoughtful and careful. Use your wisdom. God made you to be a wise person. Go with your instincts, because you have to push past a lot of good, solid information in order to get to the anti-vax and the conspiracy theory information. Don't push past illogical information because you want to have something that balances with. Don't get information about an infectious disease from people who are not trained in infectious disease, right? It just doesn't work. You're going to be misguided. And for those on the platform who are Seventh-day Adventists, stop going around and telling people that every herb was created for the healing of the nation, because that's not what the text means. That's not what the verse means. You're going to have yourself end up getting totally sick when God has already provided something for you to be healed. If I see a herb or a tree or a leaf that has therapeutics against COVID and that has been tested and proven, I'll be the first to say thank you, Jesus. But we all know that that's not out there. And what is out there are some very efficacious vaccines that are not perfect, but they work very well in this case. My wish for you is that you too will prosper and be in good health. My wish for you is that you will keep safe and you will keep your families safe. For those of you who haven't gotten the vaccine because it's not available, or you haven't gotten it because you're hesitant and you feel that it's not safe yet, wear your mask, distance, wash your hands, keep yourself and your family safe until you reach the point where somebody answers your questions and you can feel safe in taking those vaccines. Take care and God bless you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Webley. I see so many people saying thanks for the information and for the Q&A and all of that. And I think what you have said is quite clear. After answering all of those questions, it's generally clear. I know some people came in late, so they may not have gotten the full gist of what you were saying, but thank you so much. Ryan, is there any way we are going to be, I know you recorded it, is there any way we could share it? Some people want to know if they'll be able to get it again somehow. So I guess we have to look at that. I'm not sure.
I did record it so that at least we have information we could go back to Dr. Webley. And I know he probably won't mind.
Feel to share it. Nothing that I say here is novel or secret. It's just a matter of communicating with my people at that level. And I see that you had it on YouTube Live. So
yeah, I just put it there. Yeah, I didn't advertise the YouTube link much, but I just put it there just to at least so we make sure we have it, you know? So yes. I've shared the link there in the chat. And so guys, you could save it and click it and save it. All right, so we could also review and go back and let's see how we could help each other get through this. All right.
Absolutely. My thoughts exactly. And so if you need me, if there are people who still need explanation, you know, just test the waters and let me know. I'm happy to come back. And instead of doing an extensive presentation, just take more questions. We can do that as well.
All right. We have the invitation there, you know, so thank you again. And Dr. Webley, be safe, keep safe. We're going to close with a word of prayer and continue doing what you're doing. Continue being as giving as you are. And if you give him a chance, he'll stay here till 12 answering questions. That might be exaggerating, but that is the kind of person he is. And we thank you so much for being with us this evening. So as we come to a close, let's bow our heads and say a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we are so grateful for this opportunity this evening to be presented with the information that we need so that we can make wise choices moving forward in this pandemic period. We thank you for Dr. Webley giving of himself so selflessly. We thank you for the time he has spent with us. We thank you that you have given him such an experience where he can recognize that his life is to share with others the knowledge that he has. Lord, bless him, bless his family, cover them with your blood, continue to protect them, and continue to help him to use his abilities and his wisdom to share with others. We thank you for those of us who have listened. Again, help us to be wise in the choices that we will make. Help us to keep ourselves safe from day to day and realize it's not just ourselves we're keeping safe, but to not be selfish and keep those around us safe as well. Bless us, Lord. Give us a good night's rest and help us to continue to be covered by your blood and save us when you come in your kingdom, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody, for coming in. Amen. Thank you so much and continue to share what you have learned. Thank you, Dr. Webley, and good night, everybody.
Good night, and thank you very much.
Bye. You're welcome.
Bye, everyone.
Bye
Thanks
bye.
again.
Thanks again.
Bye.
Bye,
All right.
everyone. Good night.